So ionic bonding and structures, how to draw the ionic bond. So first thing, like example, if they say that draw the ionic structure of sodium oxide. So first thing, what you should do, the first step, write a chemical formula. Because you should know that how many sodium and how many oxygen atoms you have to draw to complete the structure. So if the question is draw the ionic structure of sodium oxide. So using a periodic table, first we'll find the formula of sodium oxide. So sodium is there, group 1, which so valency is +1, and oxygen is there, group 6, so valency is -2. So what will be the formula for sodium oxide? So sodium is group 1 +1 and oxygen is group 6, so -2. We cross multiply the valencies, so formula of sodium oxide is Na2O. So first we are drawing the structure of sodium oxide. So for drawing the structure, we should know the formula of sodium oxide. So sodium is Na, which is +1, and oxygen is group 6, so -2. So the formula of sodium oxide is Na2O. That is one thing. So first, now what does it mean? It means you have to draw now you have one, so you have to draw 2 sodium and you have to draw 1 oxygen. So how we'll know how many electrons are there in the sodium? So again we have to use a periodic table, because in periodic table atoms are given. So sodium is 11 and oxygen is having 8 electrons. So to draw the ionic structure, we have to draw 2 sodium atoms. So this is 1, and that should have 11 electrons. So how it will have 11 electron? The first shell, it will have 2. The second shell, it will have 8. And the third shell, it will have 1 electron, because 11 electrons are there. Then we have to draw another sodium, because in sodium oxide the formula is Na2O. So we have to draw 2 sodium atoms. The second sodium atom, similar to the first one, first shell it will have 2 electrons, second shell it will have 8 electron, and the third shell it will have 1 electron. So this will first shell 2, second shell 8, and the third shell it will have 1. Then we have to draw only one oxygen atom, and oxygen is having 8 electrons. So to draw oxygen atom, which is O, the first shell oxygen will have 2 electrons, and the second shell it will have 6, because the total 8 electrons are there. So it will have 2 in the first shell and 6 in the second shell. Now how many electrons sodium should lose? Sodium is a metal. Metal will always lose its last shell electron. So how many electrons this sodium will lose? Each sodium, so there is only 1 electron in the last shell. So as there is only 1 electron in the last shell, so this sodium will lose its electron, and the other, but when first sodium will lose electron, oxygen did not complete the octet, because to complete octet it should have 8 electron. Then the second sodium will also lose electron. So when the second sodium will lose electron, now oxygen will have 8 electrons in the last shell. So it means oxygen has complete octet. So this electron is being removed. So you don't have to draw this electron because this is already transferred. So you will remove this electron from here and it is transferred to oxygen. Now what is the charge on this sodium? Because it loses one electron, so charge will be plus 1. This sodium also loses one electron, charge will be plus 1. And oxygen take 2 electrons. So if it take 2 electrons, 2 extra electrons are there in oxygen. So the charge will be minus 2. And this attraction between the positive and the negative ion is known as ionic bonding. Is it clear, this example of sodium oxide? To everyone? Another example. Example, we want to draw the ionic structure of calcium chloride. So if we want to draw the ionic structure of calcium chloride, the first thing we have to write a formula for calcium chloride. To write a formula of calcium chloride, we'll check the position. This is calcium, so valency is plus 2, group 2, and chlorine is group 7, so valency is minus 1. So what will be the formula of calcium chloride? Calcium valency is plus 2, chlorine valency is minus 1. So we simplify and cross multiply. So the formula of calcium chloride is CaCl2. So it means we have to draw one calcium and we have to draw two chlorine atoms. Calcium should have 20 electrons and chlorine should have 17 electrons. So the formula of a calcium chloride is CaCl2. So we have to draw one calcium. Calcium is having 20 electrons, so first shell, it will have 2 electrons. The second shell, it can have 8 electrons. The third shell, it can have 8 electrons as well. And the last shell, like, because still 2 electrons are there, so in the last shell it will have 2 electrons. This is the structure of calcium. But we have to draw 2 chlorine as well, chlorine atoms. The first shell, it will have 2, second shell it will have 8, and the third shell 7. So first shell, it is having 2 electrons, second shell it is having 8 electrons, and the third shell it is having 7 electrons. Same for another chlorine. The first shell, it will have 2, second shell 8, and the third shell 7. Now this chlorine is already having 7 electrons, so it need only 1, and this chlorine also already having 7 electrons, so this also need 1. So in calcium chloride, so calcium, how many electrons calcium should lose? The total number of electron calcium should lose. So there are 2 electrons in the last shell, so it should lose 2. but it cannot lose both electrons to 1. The reason is that because already chlorine is having 7, so this chlorine only need 1. So when this electron jumps from calcium to chlorine, so this chlorine will gain 1. And then what happened? The second electron actually jumps to another chlorine, and that will also gain 1. Sorry. Why not 2? Because already it's having 7, so it only need 1 electron. So this electron jumps or transferred, so it will not be here. It is transferred to chlorine. So what is the charge on calcium? Because it loses 2 electrons, so plus 2. And chlorine, each chlorine gain 1 electron, so minus 1. And this is the ionic structure of calcium chloride. Is it clear? This example? Yes, Abdullah?
So, sir, there is non-metal have to make another shell.
No, no, they only take the electron in the shell which is already existing, and they only complete the octet.
So there is no possible way that we will draw another
You,
shell.
you don't have to draw another shell. You just have to show a transfer of the electron from metal to a non-metal. Is it clear, this example? Then another example. In exam, normally they do not ask to draw the full structure. They normally ask to show the last shell electrons. So if in exam the question is there, draw the structure, so normally they do not ask. Sometimes they can ask, but most of the time they do not ask for the complete structure. They only ask for the last shell. So how you will solve this type of question? If in exam they ask to draw only the last shell, so how you represent? Like example, if I say draw the structure of potassium oxide, okay, so you have to draw the structure of potassium oxide. First thing, you should always write a formula. So what will be the formula of potassium oxide here? Potassium is group 1 and oxygen is group 7. Group 6, sorry, by mistake. So which is minus 2. What will be the formula of potassium oxide? The formula of potassium oxide. Potassium is plus 1, whereas oxygen is minus 2. It's K2O, that's right. So the formula of potassium oxide is K2O. In the exam, they normally ask to draw the last shell electron. So how you will know how many electrons are there in the last cells? For that, you have to just check the group number. Potassium belongs to group 1. So the group number is actually showing the number of electrons. So potassium belongs to group 1, so it is having only 1 electron. Oxygen belongs to group 6, so it is having only 6 electrons in the outermost shell. So we will draw two potassium, and this is not the full structure, this is only the last shell, which normally they ask in exam. So this is a potassium last shell, and it is having only 1 electron. Then there is also another potassium that is also having 1 electron. And for oxygen, in the last shell, oxygen belongs to group 6, so this is the last shell of oxygen, which is having 6 electrons. So what will happen, because this is the last shell only, so metal will lose all of its last shell electron. So how many electron potassium will lose? One potassium. Potassium belongs to group 1. So one each potassium will lose 1. And how many electron oxygen will gain? It will complete octet, so it will gain 2 electron. So each potassium will lose 1 electron. So this electron is actually transferred from potassium to oxygen. Then what will be the charge on potassium? It will be plus 1. And what is the charge on oxygen? It will be minus 2. So this is the ionic structure of potassium oxide. These type of questions are very common, in which they normally ask that draw the last shell only, not the full atom. Like in the previous example, I was drawing the complete shells and showing the transfer, because mainly the last shell, that is the transfer of electron taking place from metal to non-metal. So we just have to draw the last shell until unless they mention draw the complete structure. Is it clear, this example of potassium oxide? How we will know how many electrons are there in the last shell? For last shell, you have to check the group number. The group number is representing the number of electrons in the last shell. Group 1 means they have 1 electron in the last shell. Group 2 means they will have 2 electrons. Group 3 means they will have 3 electrons. Group 4, they will have 4 electrons. Group 5 have 5 electrons in the last cell. Group 6 will have 6 electrons. Group 7 will have 7 electrons, and group 8 is having 8 electrons. So oxygen belongs to group 6. The group number shows the number of electrons in the last shell. Is it clear? So in exam, you don't have to draw the full structure, only the last shell. So I'm giving examples, more examples related to drawing the ionic structure. If I say draw the ionic structure of aluminium chloride. So first thing, you should write a formula for aluminium chloride. So aluminium, when you check the position of aluminium, it is group 3. So valency is plus 3. And chlorine belongs to group 7 minus 1. So what will be the chemical formula of aluminium chloride? The chemical formula of aluminium chloride. This will be AlCl3. So the chemical formula of aluminum chloride is AlCl3. So it means how many aluminium we have to draw? We just have to draw one aluminium. And we have to draw 3 chlorine. And we are only drawing the last shell, the valence shell. This is not the full structure, this is actually the last shell. But how to know how many electrons are there in aluminium? Again, we have to use a periodic table. You can see aluminium belongs to group 3. So if it belongs to group 3, how many electrons will be there in aluminium? In the last shell, it will have 3 electrons. And for chlorine, belongs to group 7, so it will have 7 electrons. So aluminium will have 3 electrons. These are the electrons of aluminium. And if one of them you are using a dot, the other one you should use a cross. This is also known as a dot and cross diagram. So each chlorine is having 7 electrons. Now what happened? Because aluminum should lose all of its electron, the last cell electron, but one chlorine cannot gain 3 electron. So one chlorine can gain only 1 electron. So this electron actually jumps from aluminum to chlorine. So this chlorine will get 1 electron. The second electron jumps to second chlorine. Yes, Abdullah?
Sir, if all the electrons have gone from the last cells of metal, we will remove the last cell.
Yeah, we will remove that as the last cell. Like, no need to remove the last cell, just make it empty. It means like that electrons are being lost from this. But it is acceptable both ways. Even you can remove the last shell or you can draw an empty shell. This will also gain 1 electron. So you should erase or remove these electrons. In exam, if you show electron are present here as well as with chlorine, you will lose the mark. So you should show that it lost the electron from the last shell. Now what will be the charge on aluminium? What will be the charge on aluminium? It loses 3 electron. So when something loses electron, the charge should be positive. What will be the charge on each chlorine atom? Because each is gaining 1. So this is -1, this is -1, and this is also -1. So basically what happened, that aluminium was having 3 electrons. Each aluminium loses electron. 3 electrons, and each chlorine gain 1 electron. It become, so the last shell become empty, and this is the structure of aluminium chloride. So in exam, if they ask to draw the structure of aluminium chloride, you should draw this structure. Even sometime, if you do not show the arrow, you can just put a square bracket, but this is also the right way. Another example, calcium oxide. We want to draw the structure of calcium oxide. Calcium belongs to group 2, valency is +2. Oxygen belongs to group 7, valency is -2. What will be the chemical formula of calcium oxide? So calcium belongs to group 2 +2, oxygen belongs to group 6 -2. First we simplify the valency, so valency is simplified as 1:1. So formula of calcium oxide is CaO. So we have to draw one calcium. We have to draw one calcium and we have to draw one oxygen. So the calcium oxide formula is CaO. So we just have to draw one calcium and one oxygen. When we draw the last shell, this is the last shell of calcium and this is the last shell of oxygen. Now how we'll know how many electrons are there in the last shell of calcium? Again, we have to use a periodic table. So when you check calcium, calcium is in group 2. So group 2 means how many electrons will be there? It will have 2 electrons. And oxygen, when you check oxygen, it is at group 6, so it will have 6 electrons in the last shell. So 2 electrons are there in calcium last shell and 6 electrons are there in oxygen last shell. So calcium will lose both of its electrons. and oxygen will gain both the electron to complete 8 or octet. So electron actually transfer from calcium to oxygen. So calcium does not have any electron in the last shell. It will be plus charge, and oxygen took 2 electrons, so it will be negative charge. And this is the structure of calcium oxide. Is it clear? This is the ionic structure of calcium oxide. Any doubt about the structure of calcium oxide? Another example, if we want to draw the structure of calcium nitride. Nitride ID is there. It means nitrogen. The compound contains calcium and nitrogen. So first we'll write a chemical formula of a compound which contains calcium and nitrogen. So there is a calcium and nitrogen. Calcium is group 2, so valency plus 2. Nitrogen group 5, valency minus 3. What is the formula of a compound which consists of calcium and nitrogen? Ca3N2. So the formula for calcium nitride Ca3 and N2. So how many calcium we have to draw? We have to draw 3 calcium. And how many nitrogen we have to draw? We have to draw 2 nitrogen. Now the number of electron in the last shell, to know the number of electron in the last shell, calcium belongs to group 2 as we check the periodic table. So calcium belongs to group 2, it is having 2 electrons. Nitrogen belongs to group 5, so it is having 5 electrons. So calcium belongs to group 2, so it will have 2 electrons. Each calcium is having 2 electrons in the last shell. This is only the last shell we are drawing, not the full structure. And nitrogen belongs to group 5, so it is having 5 electrons. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Then 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Now each calcium should lose all of its electron, and nitrogen should gain electron to complete octet. So 5 electrons are already there. So it will gain 1 electron, so it makes 6. It gain another electron, that makes 7. Then it will gain another electron from another calcium, so it make it 8. And same thing, another nitrogen already having 5, so it need 3. So 1, 2, 3. So it took 3 electrons, 2 from one calcium and 1 from another one. So the last shell, it loses electron, does not have any electron. So what will be the charge on this calcium? Each calcium loses 2 electron. So what will be the charge on the calcium? As each calcium is losing 2 electron, so the charge will be plus 2. And what will be the charge on nitrogen? Each nitrogen taking 3 electrons, so the charge will be minus 3. Is it clear, this example of calcium nitride? The ionic structure of calcium nitride. To everyone, Abdullah, Afreen, Khatem, Yusra, Saim, Yasira. Is it clear to everyone? Then how these ionic compounds exist? So how do ionic compound exist? Ionic compound exists as a lattice. What is the meaning of a lattice? Lattice means regular arrangement of the particles. So when particles are arranged regularly, we call that as a lattice. So basically, like what happened in sodium chloride, when we say sodium chloride, which is NaCl, so in sodium chloride, sodium belongs to group 1, so it is having 1 electron in the last shell. Chlorine belongs to group 7, so it is having 7 electrons. So sodium will lose electron. When it lose electron, it will get a plus charge, and chlorine gain electron, it will get a negative charge. This is not the lattice, this is ionic bond. But what happened in sodium chloride? There are a lot of sodium ions and lot of chloride ions are together arranged in a regular pattern. Like this is one sodium and chlorine or chloride ion. Then there will be another sodium and chloride. Then there will be another chloride and sodium. Then there will be another chloride and sodium. And what we call this arrangement, like there are a lot of sodium ion and chloride ion together. This is what happened with one. But there are a lot of sodium and lot of chloride ions together. And what we call this structure, we call this structure as a lattice. So lattice is basically arrangement of the particle. So ions in a ionic compound, when they transfer electron, metal will lose electron, will get a positive charge, and non-metal gain electron, will get a negative charge, and they arrange themselves in a regular pattern, and this regular pattern is known as lattice. Is it clear, the concept and the definition of the lattice? The arrangement of the ions. So basically metal will lose the electron. The lattice means because there are a lot of ions together, like sodium, as you can see, sodium is having 1 electron in the last shell, chlorine is having 7 electrons, so sodium loses electron and chlorine gain electron. So this is attraction between the positive and the negative ion is called ionic bond. But what happened? You don't have one sodium and you don't have one chloride. You have many sodium and many chloride ions together. So when you have lot of ions together and they arrange themselves like positive and negative, like one is positive, negative, positive, negative. So when these ions are arranged in a regular pattern, what we call this arrangement? We call this arrangement as a lattice. Is it clear, Abdullah? So when lot of ions are together, they arrange themselves and we call lattice. The difference is there that when you have many ions together, like when you have many sodium ions and chloride ions are together, what you call that? You call that as a lattice. When you have only one, you just represent the ionic bond. So when group of ions are together, we call that as a lattice. So these are some properties of the ionic bonds. This ionic bond result from attraction between the positive and the negative ions, and it occur between the metal and the non-metal. And what are the properties? Does form ion when and it can conduct electricity. They form a crystal lattice. Crystal lattice means they have a regular arrangement of the ions and they usually have high melting point. So in the question, which structure represents sodium chloride lattice? Which structure is representing a sodium chloride lattice? A, B, C or D? Positive ions are usually smaller, negative ions are larger, and there should be a regular arrangement. First, when you check why A cannot be an answer, why A is wrong, because for sodium they give a negative charge. A metal cannot have a negative charge, metal should always have a positive charge. That's why it cannot be A. When you check B and C, in B the positive ion is smaller, in C the positive ions are larger. And normally in sodium chloride, positive ions are smaller and negative ions are larger. Why? Because when you draw the sodium ion, as you can see in the previous example, the sodium ion is having two shells, where chloride ion is having three shells. That's why the size of the chloride ion is bigger than the size of sodium ion. So C cannot be an answer because the size are different. Why D cannot be an answer? Because the negative ions are so small and they don't have a regular arrangement. So what is the right answer? B is the right answer. Is it clear, this question? Yes, Abdullah?
Sir, why the B is correct answer again?
Why B is correct answer? Because they are asking for sodium chloride. When you draw the sodium ion is having how many shells? Originally it was having three, but it loses the last shell electron. So it is having only two shells. And chlorine is having three shells. So size of a sodium will be small and size of the chlorine should be large. So when you check the structure options, so size of a positive ion is small and negative in larger. And why A is wrong? Because the charge on the sodium is wrong. Yes, Abdullah?
Sir, but it is asking only for sodium.
Sodium chloride. If you read the question, sodium chloride lattice.
Okay, so how would we know that minus should be bigger and plus should be smaller?
Because sodium is having, when you draw the structure, sodium will have two shell, chlorine is having three shell. So two shells means size smaller. Three shells means size will be larger. Because in chlorine we are using three shells. In sodium we are using only two shells. Is it clear?
Yes, sir.
So we'll discuss more questions tomorrow. Today we discuss about the ions and ionic bonding and the lattice, which is the arrangement of the